So what does it take to become a rule breaker with the ability to make a power play, to bend the dynamics to your advantage, and to be a game changer? You probably need the skills of a visionary. In this section, we'll think about the state of mind one needs to be in and the human resources one will need to rely on in order to be not only a great analyst, able to understand the landscape, but a great leader as well, able to anticipate the way it is shifting and to trigger the necessary operational and organizational changes. Let's start by considering concrete examples. Does anyone think strategically anymore? Can you think of any specific examples of actors and or organizations that try to think about the long run and the extent to which they're prepared for it? Pause this video and see if you can come up with an answer that satisfies you. I found over the years in the classrooms that this is a rather controversial question. There's rarely a consensus. I think that this is because a lot of people would like to think that they think strategically, but there seems to be very little evidence of this. The future has no lobby goes the popular saying. Why worry about the future when there seems to be so many urgencies around you? Why worry about the future when you are a rather old policymaker who is unlikely to be held accountable in the future anyway? So finding concrete answers could be difficult. People think traditionally of actors who have time on their side, like emerging countries and economies that have bet on long-term policies in order to guarantee their long-term growth and development. But as these economies get wealthier, and as policymakers become increasingly sensitive to their constituencies and increasingly turn towards short-term issues as a result, one is tempted to wonder whether this will really last. Others will be tempted to think about visionaries who are able to develop disruptive products because they went beyond the mere features of their invention and understood the broader ramifications it could have given political, economic, and societal changes. But ultimately, it seems that we're coming up with examples that are more exceptions rather than generally valid illustrations. This suggests that the job of the visionary still needs to be invented. Part of the challenge, it seems, lies in the fact that when people conduct a basic cost-benefit analysis of a situation, comparing the pros and the cons of different options, they usually do it on the grounds of one unique dimension. It seems, for instance, that this dimension is often economic in nature. That is, people compare the economic costs and the economic benefits of each option before deciding which option is best. However, motives other than economics might be guiding other stakeholders, including political and ideological motives. This means that elements other than pragmatic ones can profoundly shape the calculus of actors. We should therefore pay attention to those different dimensions. This also confirms what we said about the need for a multidisciplinary approach that is an integral part of the visionary's job. Another part of the challenge may lie in redefining the notion of networking, a topic we touched upon earlier, but that deserves a few additional thoughts perhaps. Networking seems to have become synonymous of what everyone does in business schools in particular. It's about meeting and nurturing relationships with people in your field in order to remain in the know, in order to remain influential. Yet, rarely does networking seem to occur on a multidisciplinary way, as in historians meeting doctors, sociologists meeting financial advisors, or economists meeting computer developers. It can, but it's an exception. Why is that a problem? After all, the historian, the sociologist, or the economist will rarely be in a position to solve the urgent problem of the private sector or the individual in the need to make a decision immediately. But on the other hand, these types of profiles could give those decision makers some perspective. Let them take the distance they need to broaden their horizons. Instead of going into a very narrow path dictated by the urgency of the moment, and that could make the stalemate all the more so probable, the decision maker may have more options by introducing a longer time horizon. This suggests that the visionary will need to rethink what it means to network, who to have in a network, and perhaps be sure to have access to people who don't necessarily know how to decide, but who can analyze the raw data and provide insights others might have otherwise overlooked. Last but not least, the visionary probably needs to be both aware and wary of ideology. Aware because people might be acting more on beliefs than on facts. So if you expect someone to act in a particular way because that's just the obvious way forward, you may be surprised in the end that facts were not the only motivation of that person. This can be painfully true in a political battle, for instance, when you're trying to convince someone whose motives you misunderstand. In essence, you'd be talking a different language. But the visionary also probably needs to be wary of ideology, to the extent that since everyone is human, he or she is susceptible to making the same mistakes. The ideology is the box the traditional saying wants you to think out of. Again, perhaps, though, it might be worth forgetting altogether about the box. Ultimately, the quality that summarizes best and most concisely what it takes to be a relevant visionary is the fine understanding of the landscape, the subtlety of its architecture, and its continuous changes. It is the person who has the ability to take the deep dives into the future and who comes back to the surface to consider how fit you and your organization are to meet tomorrow's challenges. Perhaps you've already played the game Monument Valley and you've met Princess Ida. In order to reach her objectives and to get to where she needs to go, Princess Ida, with your help, needs to overcome the optical illusions set by a world in 3D and make sense out of a complex geometry. Unless she sees the world in which she lives in differently, she will fail. There's an interesting metaphor here for our visionary. It is his ability to interpret the world and go beyond the complexities of its geometry that will matter most. Let's check if we're still on the same wavelength. What should matter most when you think about the role of the visionary? Is it A, the multidisciplinary approach? B, thinking about networks in a creative way? C, being aware and wary of ideology? Or D, all of the above? I think that you'll agree that the answer is D. All of these elements will matter as the visionary looks to develop a long-term strategy. The bottom line? What makes your landscape complex is the multitude of motives driving people in it. Even worse, at times, is the fact that these motives relate to ideology rather than plain hard facts. So what is expected and obvious can be blown to pieces. The visionary qualities that we've described can help an organization overcome these challenges. So it might be worth thinking who, within your organization or entourage, can play that role for you. This is the topic of our conclusion.